Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Rick and Morty Season 9, Episode 6 video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs, WTF moments, so we will break it all down. Also, thank you to the Rick and Morty people for literally sending me merch right before I recorded this episode. So I actually have a new shirt to wear for this episode. The episode title was Rickerhead, which is a reference to the David Lynch movie Eraserhead. It's fantastic. If you've never seen it, I would recommend checking it out. It's a classic art. Rick and Morty sucks himself off. Let that sentence sink in for a second because that is genuinely the biggest WTF moment in Rick and Morty. Season 9, Episode 6. And we are going to break down exactly how the show got there, what it means, and every single Easter egg hiding inside this episode that you probably missed on your first watch. This episode is called Rickerhead, which is a direct reference to the David Lynch movie Eraserhead, a total classic if you have never seen it, and honestly worth checking out if you want to understand where this title is coming from. The episode brings in guest star Paget Brewster, who you might know from Community, and at this point, Dan Harmon has basically guest starred almost every major actor from that show on Rick and Morty. The only big names still missing are Donald Glover, Ken Jeong, and Chevy Chase, and let's be honest, Chevy Chase is probably never showing up because hell has not frozen over yet. Paget Brewster plays a hot mechanic named Rachel, who turns out to be Rick's secret favorite, someone we are only just now finding out about after years of the show teasing. This will they won't they energy between Rick's body and her. And here is where it gets interesting, because the love triangle between Rick, his own body, and Rachel for her affections is actually mirroring Chandler Bing's storyline with Joey from Friends. Since Rachel was dating Joey before she ended up with Chandler, even her name Rachel is a direct nod to Rachel and Ross and that entire 10-year will they won't they arc from Friends. This show is layering reference on top of reference before the opening title card even hits, and that is exactly the kind of thing that makes this franchise so rewatchable. The cold open kicks things off with Rick taking Morty and Summer to the alien beer garden, his favorite spot because it is all you can eat and drink, and after he already joked about being an alcoholic in recent episodes, this place is basically his personal paradise. He can consume everything in sight and just replace his stomach whenever he overdoes it, with zero consequences and nobody chasing him for anything. While they are there, Rick references Jack Nicholson's As Good As It Gets, a movie he says he will never actually watch. He just knows the title and throws it around without understanding what it actually means in context. He also drops a Hinduism reference involving Vishnu, which Morty echoes later at the very end of the episode when they return to this same beer garden after winning at the Olympics. That is the setup for a quiet little joke running through the whole episode, where Morty and Summer act like they hate being stuck at this beer garden, but by the end, at least Morty is fully on board with it. Summer, not so much. Now here is where the real chaos starts. Rick jokes about replacing his stomach because this is something that happens to him constantly. And later in the episode, a character named Seb confirms that Rick comes to him all the time to swap out his stomach because of how much he drinks and eats. Replacing body parts is actually the entire premise driving this episode, because Rick's head gets accidentally separated from his body when he gets caught inside a closing portal. What follows is this wild journey of Rick's head and Rick's body going their separate ways before eventually recombining. But not before things get extremely strange, and we mean extremely strange. Because the most shocking, jaw-dropping reveal in the whole episode is that Rick sucks himself off. That is the gag they build the entire ending around, and it makes you wonder if this is something he has actually done before. Honestly, knowing Rick, it would not be surprising at all, because he is described as a total freak who does not discriminate and is incredibly narcissistic. So this tracks as maybe one of the most twisted, self-obsessed things he could possibly do. It even echoes Beth hooking up with Space Beth earlier in the show's history, which is basically the same idea of getting it on with another version of yourself. No judgment here, though. We are not going to kink-shame the man. There is also a yeast joke thrown in, which lines up with the whole stomach replacement thing, since the beer yeast expanding inside him is exactly why he needs a new stomach so often from drinking and eating too much. This actually appears to be the first time we have seen Rick lose an entire body part, specifically his head, because of one of his own portals malfunctioning on him. It probably has happened before with smaller things like limbs, just never something this extreme. You can almost picture the writer's room sitting around asking, what would happen if Rick got his head stuck in a portal as it closed? Would he die, or would something completely different happen instead? The answer they landed on lets them show off Rick's whole Inspector Gadget-style body, packed with secrets and weapons because it has been swapped out and modified so many times over the years. At one point, Rick sings a copyright-safe version of Moon River by Andy Williams, except he swaps out the lyrics for the word stomach, probably because Dan Harmon and the team did not want to pay for the rights to the actual song, or simply were not allowed to use it. Every time Moon River shows up in a movie or TV show, it is hard not to think of that classic Simpsons joke about Nelson secretly being a huge Andy Williams fan. This moment also sets up a payoff near the end of the episode, where Rick and Morty have to use a copyright-safe version of the Looney Tunes outro music, because Warner Brothers, who owns both Looney Tunes and Rick and Morty through Adult Swim, would not let them use the real theme song. Apparently, they are extremely protective over that particular piece of music. Disney does something similar with certain characters, like Bambi, which they rarely let anyone use or joke about. Ryan Reynolds has actually talked about this, mentioning that while filming Deadpool and Wolverine, he had written some Bambi jokes. And the Bambi jokes were the one thing Disney would not approve, even though several Mickey Mouse jokes somehow made it into the final cut. It is a strange example of how studios can be extremely protective of certain characters while letting almost anything else slide, and then randomly drawing a hard line somewhere you would not expect. Rick also throws out a line about being the smartest being in the carbon-based unisphere, implying there are smarter beings out there in non-carbon-based universes. Fun fact, there is an actual real-world unisphere, a giant stainless steel globe sculpture located in Flushing, New York, built for the World's Fair. During the intro this episode, the show uses one of its newer rotating scenes, this time showing the family at the Intergalactic Olympic Games representing Earth, which ties directly into the ending of the episode. We then cut to Summer's side of the story, where she is at the body replacement store wanting thinner ankles. Considering Rick has already replaced the family's body parts multiple times before, and Summer herself has messed with her own body in past seasons, this is treated as a totally normal thing for this family to do. While there, we learn that Rick has built a self-destruct mechanism into his own body, specifically to stop anyone from stealing it or using it against him and his family. The voice controlling this system turns out to be the Garage AI, which is modeled after his late wife Diane's voice, adding an unexpectedly emotional layer to an otherwise chaotic scene. This week, we find out his body is rigged with 7 nuclear devices, suggesting the number probably changes from episode to episode depending on what is happening in the story. There's a genuinely funny bit where the body calculates exactly how far someone needs to run to be safe from the blast radius. And because it is 7 devices this time, Summer is told she needs to run 14 miles away. When she protests that they cannot even make her run 1 mile, it is a direct callback to dreading PE class at school. They also reuse Rick's ringtone from the Get Swifty episode, the same one used earlier this season, which strongly suggests this is meant to be a consistent, canonical detail across multiple seasons. Summer's phone is loaded with a mix of contacts from inside the show and some real-life Easter eggs, including Mika, which is actually the name of one of the real-life producers working on Rick and Morty, and Mushu, a reference to the dragon from Mulan. Eventually, we learn Rick's password to pause the self-destruct sequence is Morty sucks with 2xs, and for some reason, likely just for comedic timing, this password only pauses the self-destruct instead of fully disabling it, which is a strange detail if you think about it too hard. We also discover that the portal Rick originally created was just meant to take him to another location on the same planet, a place packed with mechanics that Rick visits constantly to get body parts replaced. The reason his disembodied head is suddenly sober is because most of the alcohol was still sitting in his stomach, which is obviously still attached to his body, and most of the booze in his bloodstream was technically still inside his circulatory system, which again stayed with the body. So while the head is sober, the body itself is probably still extremely drunk. Turns out getting beheaded is apparently a great way to sober up fast. Meanwhile, Summer is forced to fight off a group of alien cyborgs trying to steal Rick's body, using all the hidden weapons built into it, and there are a lot of them. This becomes a massive over-the-top action sequence later in the episode, showing off just how ridiculous and powerful Rick's modified body actually is. We also learn his body can transform into a scooter Summer can ride, which might come back as a running gag later this season. Morty, meanwhile, takes Rick's severed head to a local hospital, where Rick cracks a joke about fixing healthcare, a clear jab at how broken real-world healthcare systems are everywhere, even in countries with universal coverage, where getting an appointment can still feel like a dice roll. And once you finally see someone, Getting a good doctor feels like another dice roll entirely. Rick then tricks Morty into agreeing to temporarily attach his head onto Morty's body just long enough to survive until he can find a replacement. This is reminiscent of a previous episode where Rick combined bodies with Jerry, except that time their minds sort of merged into one shared identity with two heads. This time, it is explicitly two completely separate identities just sharing the same body, which is a very different and arguably more disturbing setup. When the hospital staff call the police, Rick and Morty are forced to make a quick escape, and the news ends up reporting that a rogue head has kidnapped a young kid, which becomes a running bit when we learn this kind of thing happens constantly on this planet, with all kinds of heads kidnapping kids on a regular basis. The hospital itself is named Schraub Medical, a direct nod to Rob Schraub, who works on the show in real life and was a major part of Harmontown for years. Eventually, they make it to Seb's shop, where Seb describes Rick as his best friend who comes in constantly for body parts, though really it is mostly just for replacement stomachs, reinforcing the joke that this drinking and eating cycle has happened many times before. We learn that Rick's body has developed a kind of semi-independent intelligence and can act entirely on its own. Seb uses a device to mellow the body out a bit, and we discover the body is actually extremely emotionally sensitive compared to Rick's head, which remains completely cold and logical, almost like they have totally opposite personalities living inside the same family. Seb then tries to betray Rick and Summer, attempting to sell off the body because of how valuable it is, to a group of aliens referred to as the Reavers. This sets up the introduction of Rachel, Paget Brewster's character, who the mechanic confirms is secretly Rick's favorite, tying directly back into that Friends reference from earlier. As the chase continues, we start seeing exactly how powerful Rick's body really is on its own, setting the stage for the massive final battle later in the episode. There is a funny moment where they board a subway, only for the train to circle back in the exact same direction they came from, straight toward the Reavers chasing them. You will also notice a violin-playing alien standing in literally every subway station, the exact same character repeated over and over. The entire chaotic train fight sequence feels heavily inspired by the villains from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, all those creations made by the High Evolutionary, especially that intense hallway fight scene from the movie. During the chase, the Reavers mention they are, quote, quiet quitting, a very post-pandemic phrase referring to employees who do the absolute bare minimum required without going above and beyond. The head Reaver even asks why they do not just regularly quit instead, since they are barely doing any work at all. But the joke lands because quiet quitting is really just doing your actual job description, nothing more. The reason this became such a widespread real-world trend is because so many workers were burning out after years of being expected to do far more than what they were originally hired and paid for. Eventually, Rick's body manages to stop the Reaver leader by making peace with him instead of fighting, which directly sets up the twist later in the episode where Rick's head and his body also form a truce, though the reasoning behind that truce ends up being a lot more disgusting than this one. We are not going to spoil exactly what that payoff is just yet. After this, Rick and Morty rob an electronics store, and Rick begins literally eating spare parts to upgrade his own head, joking that without his body weighing him down, his head is now his true, more hardcore self, and that maybe the whole show should just be him and Morty going on adventures from now on. It is not quite a full fourth wall break, but it definitely teases the idea. When his head hacks into a computer system, you can see code reminiscent of the Matrix scrolling across his eyeballs, except it is colored blue instead of the iconic green. There is also a recurring gag where the police keep showing up confused, chasing after a completely different rogue head that kidnapped a different kid, reinforcing just how common this bizarre crime apparently is on this planet. Rick then references Grand Theft Auto, joking that he just killed their in-universe GTA rating, a clear nod to all the real-world buzz happening around Grand Theft Auto 6 at the time this episode aired. He follows this up with another rant about money being a completely made-up concept, hacking into the planet's financial systems to buy plane tickets home, and mentioning he could easily do the same thing back on Earth to give the entire family unlimited wealth whenever he wants. On the plane ride home, the episode leans hard into a series of Christopher Nolan jokes. They end up watching Tenet, which Rick now claims to love, despite it being widely considered one of Nolan's weaker, more poorly reviewed films, even though it still got decent reviews simply because of his reputation. Christopher Nolan has been getting a lot of attention recently with the upcoming release of his new film, The Odyssey, but within the context of this episode, The joke is really just about them watching Tenet on a tiny airplane screen. In real life, Nolan has been a huge advocate for traditional theatrical viewing, especially IMAX screens, which is why people online constantly joke about watching his films on terrible screens like phones, tablets, and airplane entertainment systems, exactly the way Christopher Nolan definitely would not have wanted you to watch them. When Rick claims he has not watched a full movie in decades, it works as a double joke, partly mocking how younger generations raised on short-form content like TikTok struggle to sit through longer films, something several real-life young actors, including Millie Bobby Brown, have openly admitted to despite being major movie stars themselves. It is also a joke about Rick being constantly drunk, forcing him to take so many bathroom breaks that he can never sit through an entire movie, which is made even harder by the fact that Christopher Nolan films tend to run extremely long, making the timing of those breaks a total gamble unless you avoid drinking anything during the movie entirely. Morty then gets distracted by a flight attendant who has 3 boobs, a clear nod to the classic Total Recall joke. Morty acting overly horny has not been a major focus in recent seasons compared to earlier ones, so this feels like a deliberate callback. It also pays off Rick's emotional rant from a previous episode, where he warned Morty that his alcoholism was a genetic disease Morty would eventually inherit too. And here we start to see Morty leaning into that same reckless, alcoholic energy. When they land, you can spot another herald alien from the background of the show, a species that originally debuted back in the Morty Night Run episode. Whenever you see one of these aliens pop up, it is never meant to be the exact same character, just another random member of the same species, and somehow they are always wearing the exact same outfit. The real-world joke here is that the Rick and Morty animation team just keeps reusing the same character model in the background of different episodes, while pretending it represents a completely different individual each time. Back at the body, Rick's body delivers a surprisingly heartfelt message to Summer, the kind of thing Rick himself would absolutely never say out loud, even though deep down he clearly feels the exact same way about his family. This sets up the big reunion moment at the airport between Rick's head and his body, which is staged like a parody of those overly emotional airport reunion scenes you see in movies and television. Except instead of a tearful hug, the head and body actually hate each other and immediately try to destroy one another, kicking off a massive Dragon Ball style brawl loaded with references to the Anakin versus Obi-Wan duel from Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. This also appears to be one of the very first times we have seen Rick's head fight against his own body directly, even though we have seen Rick fight alternate versions of himself plenty of times before. Eventually, Morty and Summer track down where Rick's ship was parked the entire time, which turns out to be the original reason his head got separated from his body in the first place, all because they could not find the ship fast enough. At this point, his head is attached to a tiny crab body while he searches for a permanent replacement, claiming he and his old body are done for good and going their separate ways. Of course,